So friends, as we know, the Buddhist organization, the Sangha, is the oldest continual Sangha in the world, continuous community in the world, 2,600 years. And you can imagine any community like that, you will get conflict, you will get differences. And so inbuilt into the Buddhist organization, or I like to call it more like an organism, are built-in methods of conflict resolution, of building harmony in the community, how to listen to each other more deeply, how to use compassionate speech. And these are practices that have now also come out of the monastery into lay people's lives, like ours, or many of us who are listening to this. How to bring peace in ourselves and peace in the world. And in between, peace in our family and peace in our society. So it's both an internal practice and an external practice. The first is always to work with ourselves, to find that if we want peace in the world, we must find peace in ourselves too. It's not either or. One works with the other. I used to be a Halla Bol peace activist, organizing big demonstrations, going to jail, organizing a lot of sort of, this sort of aggressive, angry demonstrations. And I burnt out. And I tried to find a way of being peace, not just fighting for peace. And after a long search, I found that the Buddha Dharma suited me for a number of reasons. And in that search, I found a teacher called Thich Nhat Hanh. And on the second day of a meditation, of a retreat for artists in 1987, he taught us some walking meditation. And I felt that I really touched peace for the first time as a visceral experience, not just as an idea. So I know peace is possible. And then we found that we could act in a different way when we want people to listen to us. As angry activists, people are not listening to us. How we could dialogue with people, with politicians, with corporations we felt who may be affecting the climate in a certain way, talking to their children, and creating community, a community of resilience, of community of a sort of conscious living, where anybody was welcome. But even in those communities, we had to find ways of creating harmony in our community. Because, as we know, peace begins at home, with our families. And so when we live together, we saw that there's a particular practice which came out of the Buddhist meditation monasteries called beginning anew. And I thought I'd share that with you because it's a very nice practice, which we do with our friends, with our workplace, in our home. And it's a 3 or 4 part practice. And the first part is when we sit together and we'll put a flower in between us, and the person who's moved to speak will pick up the flower and put it in front of them and speak. It's a bit like a talking stick idea. But the flower is there to remind us to stay fresh. And then we share, and what we do is we call it flower watering. We water the other one's flower. So whether it's our child or our spouse or a friend, or some significant other, we actually are very practical in how we water that flower inside them. All of us has a flower inside. All of us have a flower inside us. It gets a bit droopy sometimes. So how to really recognize that, appreciate. And it could be anything practical. It could be something like the food that somebody's made for you, or that they went out to get something for you, or there are 100 things that somebody does for you every day. And it's very nice to do with children too. Children can share. The second aspect of beginning anew is sharing where you're at yourself. And linked to that, if you have any regrets, if you said something or done something, or even thought something that could be unskillful, and you share that. And you share that in such a way that the other person really feels that you've actually realized that something you said or did was not so skillful. You may have hurt somebody. It's always better to say it ourselves. And sometimes something else may be happening at work, or be away. Like I travel a lot. I go on pilgrimage every year. I'm on pilgrimage nearly 4 or 5 months of the year. And something else may be happening. So when I'm talking to my spouse or my wife, I'm telling her where I'm at, and I may have said something a little unskillful. So just to know where I'm at, something's happened at home, something's happened on my journey. So, and then the fourth aspect, or the third aspect, is really where you share what's been hurting you. When you've heard something, or somebody's done something which has not been sort of very nice for you, then instead of blaming the person, the first thing you do is think of 2 or 3 good things about the person. And then you can share, that day you said something which really upset me. And that's how the sort of the opening statement goes. But you think you're speaking really from a place of love, from compassion, not from a place of blaming. Now, when I talked about this flower in front of you, the talking stick, the practice is the other one doesn't interrupt. The other one doesn't try and justify anything. It's your space to speak. So, for example, if you do flower watering, you might offer the flower, and then somebody else does the flower, and then somebody else. And then later you might do the sharing the hurt. So you have to be very skillful with your speech, so you don't cause more hurt. And the other side, listening in itself is a great practice, especially when you're feeling that maybe the person has the wrong perception, and you still listen. You listen deeply, you use your breath. And later in a few days, if you're feeling that things are calm, you can even share maybe that the perception was a little different. You might develop a peace treaty. This is done in monasteries too, and amongst us, amongst friends, we develop a peace treaty that we say, okay, if we get hurt, we will tell the other within 24 hours, but we will not speak about it. We might speak on a Friday or later in the week, take an appointment and say, let's speak about this. Because these little hurts, these little irritations can become very, very strong knots. And then that's very hard to untie, because they just become ossified. So beginning anew is a wonderful practice of creating some sort of understanding and harmony, but also a way of understanding ourselves and how we might be hurting somebody who is important to us. And we can begin anew with anyone, with our workplace, with our family and friends. And these practices of deep listening and compassionate speech also can be used in peace spaces or peace negotiations. I remember I was invited into a space between Palestinians and Israelis. And these were people who had long stories of hurt and misunderstanding. And so we'd practice every day in the Plavanish community. And in the afternoons we'd sit together. And then as we'd go around, each person would share their suffering. And everyone else would just listen. The Palestinians listening to the Israelis listening to the Palestinians, not interrupting. And very often you could see people crying. And just the Palestinians sharing and the Israelis crying. And slowly you realize that the commonality between all of us was our deep suffering. And over the 15 days that we sat together, at the end of it, we could see the bond of friendship, of non-aggression that had really developed. And these were people who had been involved in the conflict, actively involved in the conflict on both sides. So it is possible to use these practices to come to understanding. And we can look even at the Buddha's time. There were many conflicts. He was involved in advising kings on how to stop wars, stop a war between his mother's kingdom and his where his mother came from and his father came from, on a water dispute, and saying, what is more important, the blood of your warriors or this water dispute? Also trying to build a community or a country based on ethics that can really protect a country, protect the people of the country, where we don't start looking at othering people within our country. And then even outside of our country, not creating this understanding of an othering of people outside of our country. And this is a very deep understanding of Buddhism, where we understand that there's no such thing as a self, and that your suffering is my suffering, your happiness is my happiness, and that crosses all boundaries of discrimination on religion, on nationhood, on gender, race. So it's important to practice to be peaceful in ourselves, and then let that peace emanate, if we can, and also engage with others in peaceful interaction, and try and really listen to the suffering of others and help in trying to create a more harmonious and less conflict in the world. Thank you.